Hello students, welcome to our video that is on the steering and the suspension system for the two-wheelers. We already saw about the steering system that is required in the two-wheelers. Also we are seeing about the suspension system that is required in the two-wheelers. We saw about the requirements and the design considerations for the two-wheelers. Now we will see the types of systems that we generally use in the suspension system for the two-wheelers. Mainly whenever we are talking about the suspension system, we are talking about the two components, that is spring and the damper, or we can say shock absorber, right? We might have all seen this component that is known as the spring and shock absorber assembly. The function of the spring is to absorb the vibrations that is being generated during the vehicle driving. For example, if the vehicle wheel is going over a bump, then because of the bump the load will be applied on the spring. That spring generates that load into the vibrations. So mainly the load which is being generated during the driving will be first absorbed by the spring. After that, what will happen is that spring will generate the vibrations, right? It will completely absorb the load and will not allow the driver to face the load. So the spring will convert that load into the vibrations. That vibrations then further will be damped by the help of the shock absorber or the damper, right? The function of the shock absorber is to absorb the vibrations that is being generated because of the spring, right? So mainly the shock is absorbed by the spring, but we call the shock absorber to the damper. So it's better to call the spring and the damper assembly, right? The function of the damper is to absorb the vibration that is being generated during the spring motion, right? Whenever the vehicle goes over any uneven surface, the spring will vibrate. That vibration will have to be damped. Otherwise what will happen is that vehicle will go in the straight direction by doing an up down vibrating motion, right? That is not comfort for the driver. So when that vibration is generated, that needs to be damped by the help of the damper, or we can say by the help of the shock absorber. This is one basic type of assembly that we use in the vehicle, right? In the case of the four-wheelers as well, what we use is that the damper and spring assembly. In the case of the two-wheeler as well, we use the damper and spring assembly. The spring is covered on the outer side of the damper. In the inner side, the damper is provided. Now let's see the detailed working of these two components. The first one is the spring. How the spring works. Right, as I have told you, in the case of the spring, there are mainly different type of springs. Right, in the case of the four-wheelers, we have already discussed about the spring that is known as the leaf spring. Right, the leaf spring gives us the function of the damper and spring both, but it is mainly used in case of the heavy vehicles because it is noisy. Right, and it also increases the weight of our vehicle, so it is not sufficient to use it in the two-wheelers. In the case of the two-wheelers, the spring type that we use is basically a helical spring. A helical spring is basically used on the two-wheelers, and the function of helical spring will be to absorb the load and to transmit that load into the vertical directions. Right, during the cornering, the two-wheeler will also face a load from the side as well. So during the sideways load, the helical spring will not be sufficient to take the load in case of the turning of the vehicle. In case of the four-wheelers, there are other auxiliary arrangements has been given, such as an anti-roll bar. But in case of the two-wheeler, there are no chances of the vehicle rollover, right? So we don't require any anti-roll bar in case of the two-wheelers. But the main purpose of saying is that the side load that is being generated in case of the two-wheeler will not be taken by the helical spring. Helical spring will only take the loads that is being directed from the downward or upward directions. Second thing is the shock absorber. right? How the shock absorber work, how the load is being transmitted, and how the vibration is being absorbed, right? What type of heat generation or energy generation is used in case of the shock absorber is that the vibration energy is being transferred to the heat energy, and that heat energy is being used to get the vibration into the atmosphere. That heat energy will be transferred to the atmosphere, and this is how we generally absorb the vibration which is being generated with the help of spring. There are two cases that has been shown in case of the shock absorber or the damper. On the rightward side, you can see the compression phase of the shock absorber. There are two phases of the shock absorber, that is compression and rebound. When the vehicle goes over any load, for example, if the vehicle is going over a bump, so what will happen is that star will go over bump, so it will apply upward force in case of the damper. Because of that, what will happen is that damper will compress itself, right? To absorb the load, it will compress itself. The first stroke will be known as the compression force. In that case, what will happen is that there are two valves has been given in the case of the shock absorber, right? We have also studied about the telescopic shock absorber in the subject, that is basis of automotive system. The function is same, right? The shock absorber is same. We will just go it one more time so that we can clear how the shock absorber works. There are two valves that is being given in the case of the shock absorber. One is connected with the rod that is being connected to the upward part of the vehicle, and second one is at the bottom of the absorber or the cylinder of the absorber that is connected to the below part of the absorber. There are two ends of the absorber, one is upward part and second one is the downward part. So you can say that upward part is known as valve A and the downward part is known as valve B. So whenever there is a compression, then what will happen is that the fluid that is being filled between the two valves will get compressed, right? The shock absorber is filled with the oil, right? That we all know. So whenever we go above the bump, the fluid between the two valves will be compressed. Now the valves are two-way valves, but it will only operate when the pressure is generated from either side. So because of the compression, the oil will be compressed. The oil will be at the higher pressure. So because of the high pressure, the oil will go from the below part of the valve A to the upper part of the valve A. But we can see that the upper part of the valve A, in that the rod is given. So the area of the upper part of the valve A is lower compared to the area between the two valves, right? So it will not be sufficient to store the amount of the oil that is coming from the below side. So excess oil will go from the below part of the valve B to the sideways cylinder, right? The cylinder is two type, right? Twin shock cylinders. In the case of the sideways path, we have kept some small part in there, some small areas where the oil is not filled. So that excess oil will go from the valve B towards the downward side, then oil will be filled in the sideways path of the shock absorber, right? This is simply how our system works during the compression. Now second stroke is the rebound, right? The vibration will be generated, so when absorber is compressed, it will come back to its original position as well. That is known as the rebound. In the case of the rebound, you can see in the second figure, the opposite effect will happen. The oil that went towards the upper part of the valve will again be compressed because valve will expand. So the area of upper part will compress. Because of that, the oil will come back to its original position, that is between valve A and valve B. Also the oil that went towards the cylinder will come back to valve A between valve B, because from that position the pressure is not required. The valve B is always open from that side, so that from the sideward side the oil can come back between the valve and valve B. So this procedure will continue for some time, and because of this procedure the heat will be generated in case of the oil. That heat will continuously be released or is supplied to the atmosphere, and after some time the vibration will be absorbed. Sometime, which means it is very small time, right? So driver will not feel those vibrations, and if he will feel the vibration, it will for a very small time. So this is how the comfort is provided by the help of the shock absorbers. So we saw about how the spring and shock absorbers actually work, and with the help of these two components the suspension system is created. But the suspension system has different types and different arrangements, and from that different arrangements it has different types of the suspension system. Those types of the suspension system will be seen in the next lecture. Until then, thank you so much.